Can I propose to take questions 6 to 12 together? Over 400 political, business and civic society leaders from across the island attended the 5th plenary session of the All-Ireland Civic Dialogue on Brexit in Dublin Castle on the 15th of February. This was a valuable opportunity to update participants on the Government's position on the latest Brexit developments and our intensive contingency planning work to prepare for no deal. Having met the 5 main political parties in Belfast the previous week, I welcome the opportunity to once again engage with political parties north and south and to hear the concerns of society and business through interactive discussions on people, citizens and rights, and also business preparations. There's been a deep consultation exercise which helped shape the Government's policies, strategies and objectives in the Article 50 negotiations and our domestic response to Brexit. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade will produce a report of the proceedings and will be published on its website.
Consistent themes which we've heard at the Civic Dialogue was frustration from people about the lack of detail about potential aid programmes or clarity from the Government about what they will be faced with on March 29 or on any date when Brexit will kick in. In particular, many businesses told me about how slow everything has been to move from calling on people to be prepared and actually delivering substantive aid at the level of individual companies. A year and a half after aid for the agri-food sector was announced, the loans are only now beginning to be approved. Since last summer, we've been seeking an update from Government on the preparedness data, which was formally being prepared on a 6-monthly basis. For some reason, Minister Humphreys and the Government appear to have decided to discontinue this research series. Can you explain why you have not published any recent data on the level of business preparedness? We do have lots of data on the number of companies seeking basic information, but the more important information on the impact of Brexit and preparedness levels has disappeared. Last December, you stated the Government's intention to ensure that, quote, every business which needs to be ready will be ready, unquote, by March 29th. What is your current assessment, Taoiseach, of the level of preparedness? Do you still believe that everything that can be done has been done? And if there is, as expected, an extension, what will be done to address clear deficiencies in preparations in added time?
I think that the Civic Dialogue process has been an important and very useful device in confidence building across the country. One of the things that has impacted on that confidence over last weekend was the sudden blowing up, if you like, of the voisinage dispute when a Northern Ireland registered vessel was arrested in Irish territorial waters. Can I ask you, just in relation to that dispute, because I know there was immediate contact between the Government and Fianna Fáil to fast-track legislation that has been stalled for some time, what exactly is your legislative solution? Because there are concerns in relation to finding a solution which is important for all of us, but not one that doesn't address the issues that caused the court case to be taken in the first instance, which was a number of fishermen very concerned about the impact of mussel dredging from northern boats and the concerns that you couldn't restrict the impact simply to northern boats because all UK registered boats could in fact avail of this gentleman's agreement as it is to date. So can you just maybe indicate to us, Taoiseach, because I know you were deeply involved over the weekend, what exactly you understood as the dispute and what specifically the legislative measures you want to fast track now to address it into the future, and will that give the guarantee and assurance to people that it won't be, if you like, a backdoor to wholesale access to Irish waters from either other UK registered vessels or from indeed London Agreement vessels, which would be very significant for the Irish fishing industry.
Burton.
Thank you. I think the atmosphere at the conference was one that was full of apprehension and concern, particularly by the business people who were there, because clearly particularly for small businesses, and there's lots of small businesses on both sides of the border, as well as you probably know, most hauliers in Ireland are small to medium-sized business, with the average size of a fleet being about 5 trucks. And no matter what happens, there has to be a very significant increase in the amount of documentation that has to accompany import and export. That's a massive cost, both in time and in administration and in money to most medium-sized businesses. And really what I was hearing, on the fringe of the meeting was people's concern that very, very little has been made explicit to them. I understand, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen, you don't want to frighten people. On the other hand, I actually believe people need to have a lot more preparation undertaken at the moment, and I don't think there's enough outreach. For instance, in Dundalk, it's the talk of the place, all the work that has been done on the former customs building. And yet, people are saying, no, nothing is going to happen. But I mean, clearly, no matter what outcome there is, documentation and so on, with any change in UK status, is going to have to change. And I think it would be better if people were actually prepared for that now, so that they could minimise the ultimate disruption that might unfortunately happen.
McDonald.
Taoiseach, I agree that the All-Ireland Civic Dialogue has been a very necessary and a very useful exercise. I'm interested to know what your future plans are for this dialogue. Do you foresee this becoming a forum for exchange on Ireland post-Brexit? Because whatever way this lands, whether it's hard or soft, Brexit will have huge implications for this entire island. It strikes me that this format, and we need to do work to involve unionism, and I note that you spoke at the Alliance Party conference at the weekend. I think that was extremely positive, to actually engage more and more of unionist opinion, whether it's through the political parties or more generally across society, civic unionism, if we can use that term, that it needs to be a space for those views to be articulated. But could you just share with us what you see as the future of this dialogue? Secondly, on the last occasion that we met, in addition to issues around business and commerce and trade, huge issues were raised around the whole area of citizens' rights. Taoiseach, you famously assured Northern citizens that never again would they be left behind, but the truth is that they are being left behind. I mean, even in the best case scenario now, where the backstop or the protocol is honoured and delivered, that's a significant move away from what was an initial promise to Irish and EU citizens, that they would be free to exercise their rights and enjoy their rights where they reside. That's now not the case. And that's a very, very serious matter, and that's a matter that people are very seized of at this moment. I think it's a pity, Taoiseach, that you didn't avail of the opportunity to afford the 2 additional European Parliament seats for the people of the North. That could have been done. I believe that should have been done. I think you should have, if you like, put your money where your mouth is as regards not leaving people behind, and allowed people from right across society in the North to return to representatives to the European Parliament.
I attended the dialogue, and of course dialogue in this current situation of Brexit is important, but it's not much good if those involved in the dialogue, or some of them, are not in full possession of the real story. So if we take the report that you said you didn't read on the front page of one of the national newspapers about hundreds of guards being deployed to the border counties, it's quite astonishing that you haven't read it, to my mind. But if I understood your answer correctly, what you're saying is that's got absolutely nothing to do with Brexit and the possibility of a hard border. So it's just a coincidence and has to do with a more sort of general concern about organised crime. Could you clarify that that's what you're actually saying, just so we can understand? Because I think most people reading the newspapers today would have seen the report as having something to do with preparations by the Guards for the possibility of a hard border. And of course that anxiety and fear would have been fuelled by comments that you made in Davos, where you made references to the deployment of the army. And another important piece of information in this regard I'd like to know is, have you had any discussion with EU commissioners, with Barnier, Juncker, or leaders such as Macron and Merkel, who've talked about, in the event of a no deal, the need to protect the integrity of the single market, about what they mean by that? What are they expecting? Because I'm fearful that there will be pressure from that quarter on you in the event of a no deal, and I find it slightly hard to believe you haven't asked them what they mean when they make those sorts of statements.
Thanks very much. Just to clarify for Deputy Boyd Barrett, the situation, the position is that we're improving and increasing Garda resources all over the country. There are more Gardaí, more armed support units, more cars, more investment in the Gardaí. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that that the border region, or the northern region as the Gardaí call it, would also see an increase in Gardaí and an increase in armed support units when it's happening everywhere else in the country as well. So that is the context in which it's happening. I'm happy to clarify that it'll be happening, Brexit or no Brexit, because of the level of crime, unfortunately, that people experience in Ireland. Not least armed burglaries in rural Ireland, which we're determined to crack down on and take more action on in Cavan and Donegal, in Louth, but also all over the country too. Deputy Burton asked about customs declarations. These figures were made available actually at the meeting. That's the number of customs declarations would increase from about 1 million to 20 million, so roughly a 20-fold increase in the number of information and documentary obligations that would fall on business, and yes, that would have a considerable cost in terms of time and administration. We're trying to make that as simple as possible if it happens through use of ICT that wouldn't have existed 20 or 30 years ago, and also training is on offer for businesses that want it. In terms of voisinage, the government's policy is to restore the situation to the status quo ante, to go back to what we thought the law was before the Supreme Court struck it down in 2016, and that is essentially reciprocal, saying to vessels from Northern Ireland that those vessels can enter our 6-mile limit, just as vessels from Ireland can now enter the 6-mile limit in Northern Ireland. It's quite an unfair situation at the moment that vessels from south of the border can enter the Northern Ireland 6-mile limit waters, but vessels from Northern Ireland can't. We want to correct that and put it right. There were complications before, I think, particularly around large vessels, but as large vessels are now all banned from the 6-mile limit, I'd hope that we can get cross-party support on getting that legislation through. It's been published already. It's already gone through second stage in the Seanad. I'd hope we can get it done by Easter. It would help if the UK government could clarify their intention not to withdraw Northern Ireland from the Dublin Convention, but we're not going to make that, or from the London Convention, but we're not going to make that a precondition. In terms of the issue of European Parliament representation, it isn't possible to have a constituency in the European Parliament that is outside the European Union, and only EU citizens can vote in European elections. That's in the treaties. So it wouldn't be possible to have a constituency of Northern Ireland, and what's more, even if it was, you would only be able to allow EU and Irish citizens to vote. You'd have to forbid UK citizens from voting, and that I think would be a problem in itself. But people will have an opportunity, obviously, in voting for Mark Durkan in the European elections to make sure that there's somebody living in Derry, somebody who can represent all of Ireland in the European Parliament. And we will look at other mechanisms that perhaps could work. Accession countries can elect observers to the European Parliament. Perhaps we could do something similar for Northern Ireland, but I can't promise that at this stage. In terms of citizens' rights, people who hold Irish citizenship and therefore EU citizenship living in Northern Ireland will continue to have citizens' rights. That is the right to work, study, travel anywhere within the European Union without any need for visas or permits or anything like that. If the withdrawal agreement is adopted, they will continue to have access to the European health insurance card and also will be able to participate in Erasmus during the transition period. And I committed in Belfast at the weekend to make it a negotiating priority of mine when it comes to the future relationship talks, to ensure that EU citizens living in Northern Ireland are treated as though they were resident in the European Union when it comes to those practical rights and privileges such as the European Health Insurance Card and participation in Erasmus. And I also want Northern Ireland universities to be able to opt into EU research programmes as well.
Now,